Whenever I hear injuries to our major guys, there's only one person I'm going to contact and talk to. There's one person and one person only. And just in case you guys have forgotten who that is, go ahead and hit that, Chris.
Paging Dr. West. Paging Dr. West. Paging Dr. West. Paging Dr. West.
Wake up, Mr. West, Mr. West, Mr. Fresh, Mr. By himself, he's so impressed. Wake up, Mr. West, Mr. West, Mr. Fresh, Mr. By himself, he's so impressed.
And there he is, the one, the only, the good doc, Dr. Mason West, our go-to guy for anything injury related and all things Bears, man. Hey, absolutely. I know we only got 20 minutes with you. And so I'm ready with some rapid fire stuff. They're already firing them in the comment section, man. So tell me everything you can tell me about this injury.
Yeah, so we found out today, right? Teven Jenkins ended up getting calf strain, not on one leg, but both legs. That's something that you don't hear too commonly when it comes to a lot of sports injuries. But when you hear something like that, you got to think mechanism of injury. So how did this happen? Because when you think about it, before the game happened, at the podium, all that jazz on Thursday when he was talking, when he was talking to the media, everything seemed fine. There wasn't anything out of sorts. And the whole plan the whole time was for pretty much none of the starters to play anyway. So that didn't factor in whatsoever. So you have to think that sometime between Thursday and what we found out today, that something went down. And from my understanding, right, that they still wanted some of the players who weren't going to play, the starters, to get some work. So they had, like a morning practice, right? So you get some conditioning, things like that. And more likely than not, what you're seeing there is that, especially when you have both calves, again, that's kind of funky. I think after you had a really long week, Flus himself said having those two games, the joint practices were like having preseason games. That's a lot of work that goes in on the body. Then all of a sudden you have, like conditioning, another hard work day on Saturday, and boom, you got, two calf strains. These guys worked really, really hard when they were in Indianapolis, and, probably pushed it a little too much.
I've seen a lot of injuries, and I don't know, maybe it went over my head when you were just talking, but it sounded to me like the injury, could that have happened simultaneously, that he injured both of them at the same time? And how could that be?
Well, we think about these injuries and strains in particular as this big momentous event, right? Like we're running and all of a sudden hamstring goes. And a lot of times that's true. But at the same time, it could be also a slow burn. So, let's say the calves were already tired, fatigued, maybe a little tight from, this hard week in Indianapolis they were having. Maybe you didn't get a great warm up, all that stuff kind of combining. And then over the course of time, over this workout that they had, you get these micro tears that become moderate tears. And now all of a sudden you have a strain. At the end of the day, a strain is just that. They're these little micro tears. It's just a matter of how intense it is. And that's the same for a grade 1 tear, grade 2, and then 3 is a partial, 4 is complete. It's just a fancy way of saying you have a tear. So, it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. You could drop 100-pound weight on your leg and it's not going to feel great. You could drop 101-pound weights, and is that not really the same thing?
Yeah. Well, what combination or movement do you think could cause that severe of an injury to both calves? Though it's just weird to me. Is it more so of a lack of hydration, and we know that Tev also did the Pilates during the off season. Could any of that stuff have played a factor in these injuries?
You got to take into account, the whole system, right? Everything head to toe. You got to take nutrition, hydration, all of that comes into play. That could always be a factor. At the end of the day, these things tend to happen if your calves are ready for 100 pounds of work, but you keep giving it 110, 120 over and over and over again. Eventually they're going to say, I don't want to do this anymore. So more likely than not, I think it was probably more something conditioning wise. Some running would be my guess. Just as you're doing that push off phase of your run, you have a lot of kinetic energy stored in the calves, specifically gastrocnemius. That's got that bigger calf muscle. You think of the two heads on the back of your leg. That's going to be a lot more plantar flexion, so the push of the foot, but it also controls the knee bending. And then you have the deeper muscle, your soleus, and that is like the powerhouse of your lower body. If you have a weak soleus, you're not going to be able to push and power off. So more likely than not, you have to kind of differentiate between the two a little bit. I mean, it's not the biggest thing in the world when you're rehabbing overall, but for the most part, my guess would be, again, over the course of the week, just a lot of work going into those legs, and then probably, like you alluded to, a little, not fully hydrated, nutrition a little funky, maybe the warm-up wasn't great, and then you go into a hard run, whatever the course, whatever that conditioning might look like, and now all of a sudden those micro tears become a little bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So my question for you is just imagining a calf strain and knowing that you have to walk, you have to move from A to B. It's not like a hamstring, right? It's not. You can probably confidently not worry about a hamstring if you're walking around and doing normal things in your day-to-day life. It's a really explosive injury kind of, and you can disrupt the healing process when you start running and doing things like that. But just walking around with a calf injury or two calf injuries, how is his recovery time going to be affected by the fact that he's got to move around?
That's the thing, we've gotten to the point now, you hear about the price principle, and that was like the old school thought whenever you had an injury, right? Protection, rest, ice, compression, elevation.
Mm-hmm.
Throwing that out, that's garbage. We don't do that anymore. It's about, yes, there might be some times where you need to still protect it, of course, but it's about loading in a progressive, slow manner. So that's tough when you talk about like something like walking, right? When you walk, at the end of the day, that's putting some stress in the calf. I mean, literally just 3 weeks ago, I was dealing with my own calf thing that was going on, and just little things like just putting pressure and pushing off that foot. It's brutal. Bending the knee into a squat, it sucks. Like, it's hard to take enough pressure off the calf, but at the same time, just give it a little bit of the load it needs so that it can fully recover. So it's a really tough one. I mean, if anyone's poo-pooing a calf strain, you've never had it. You just haven't felt what it's like, because it's pretty rough.
What does the rehab for this type of injury consist of, really? Is it just rest, or is there something else that he can do to kind of speed up the progress?
Yeah, so if I had, let's say he came across my table and I was working with him, I'd be pretty aggressive with it. And I wouldn't do this with everybody, but I would do some dry needling, try to clear out any trigger points that might be in the calf, because that's going to create some dysfunction in the muscle. You're looking for a twitch response, basically just get that muscle to twitch and then whole neuromuscular system to reset, get those little, you might call knots, to try to relax. Dig in there. You're using your hands, you're using these like little metal tools to just try to get, as much good inflammation and good swelling to the area as possible, and also clear out any of the gunk that builds up when you have that kind of a strain. And once you do that, now all of a sudden you also want to do a little mobility work with it, but now you do want to load, right? So let's say I used 100 before, so let's use it again. So let's say originally he could do 100, but once you get a strain, it slams all the way down to 40 because now you can't take as much. You give 45, right? You give 50. You just slowly eke and give more and more load, especially eccentrically. So a good example of that would be go up into a heel raise on both legs, shift your weight over to the injured one, and slowly lower that heel down to get full length. Do that with body weight. I actually would probably have the person do it with blood flow restriction training. That's going to actually speed up that healing process, and you get more strength out of it that way. Then when you're good on that, now you're going to add some load to it. Once you add some, some external force, some weight, now all of a sudden, once you get that done and, that does not painful anymore, your range of motion is increasing. Now you're going to get plyometric with it. So that's where you're going to start some little jumps, and then you're going to build the little jumps into moderate jumps. And then you're going to get into some running. And that's when you get back to that true return to play thought process.
We need you up at Hallis Hall, Doc. You just convinced me.
Hey guys, we only have a few more minutes left with Dr. West. We'll try to get to a couple of questions before he gets out of here. But my last question to ask is, looking at a 6-week time frame to get him back to where he needs to be, I'm betting that at least 3 weeks of that is going to be conditioning itself, just not being able to really do anything to keep his wind the way he needs to. What do you think the conditioning aspect is being considered as far as the time frame goes?
Yeah, there's ways you can kind of cheat it a little bit, so maybe you can't necessarily walk or run right on that calf strain, but you could do the bike, and that way you'd be able to get a little conditioning. You can get some arm bike, you can swim. That's another way that you can kind of cheat the system a little bit. I mean, but you're absolutely right. None of that replaces it. I mean, you could be an all-star cyclist, go play basketball for the first time in 3 months, and you're going to be gasping after 10 minutes. It's a different kind of cardio. So those last couple of weeks, you do have to have that ramp up process. It's like we talk about calcing for hits. Same thing applies to the cardiovascular system. If you don't have that build up process and you just jump right in, like, great, my calf's feeling good, but now the first time he goes to do a block, the first time he pulls and has to run downfield, are you putting that newly rehabbed calf in a disadvantageous position because another part of the body or even just the cardiovascular system is not where you need it to be? So yeah, those last 2-ish weeks, are going to be a big on that ramp up process.
Well, my last one, Doc. I know we've learned in recent years the toll that the cycle of injury, pain, sometimes surgery, rehab takes on a player's emotional and mental situation, stability. And I just want to ask you, how do players overcome those hurdles during the physical recovery process? Well,
you're absolutely right. It's tough. Sometimes I feel as much as like a traditional therapist as a physical therapist sometimes when you're dealing with especially some of those longer term injuries, especially when you stack them. Every player is different. Some players just gut it out and they're good. Some players end up needing sports psychologists to talk through some of those mental barriers that are starting to develop there. Other ones just need outlets. What's your daily dose of dopamine? What makes you feel good? Some guys go with it's hanging out with their teammates. Other people, it's their family. Other ones, it's going to be like, hey, I need to kick back and I need to play Xbox. It doesn't really matter. Everyone's got their things that they do to feel good mentally. And, that's because if you don't keep the mind right, the body's never going to heal.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Let's get to a couple of questions, man, because I've seen a couple. I think there's a couple start for you, but Mark Kazak wants to know what's a realistic time frame to getting back out there.
I mean, I think 6 weeks is pretty appropriate, I would say. Could you push it to like 4? Yeah, if the Bears were like making a playoff run or something like that, and 4 weeks from now he was going to be that first game of the wild card spot of the playoffs, he could be back for that. But and if we're being super conservative, let's say this was at the end of a season and he wasn't going to come back at all. Now you're looking probably just why not? You're going to go closer to 8 just to be safe. You're not playing for anything in particular, so you're holding off. So it's anywhere from 4 to 8, but so I think 6 really does put you in that perfect spot. It's not something you'd have to go IR or anything like that. It's just not really necessary because he always has a chance to come back sooner.
So before we get to this next question, I thought, be honest with you, man. Before you get out of here, I do want to ask you a question about how you think the lineup is going to shake up. I do want to ask you real football stuff, but
absolutely.
Now I just lost my train of thought. Damn it. Let's just ask you this question while I think about this. Would training like a sprinter help?
In a way, it can. The thing is, so it's all about specificity of training. There's really almost never going to be a time where Teven or almost any offensive lineman has to go from full stop to full start, essentially a 40-yard dash. That doesn't happen. That's also why 40-yard dashes, I think, are stupid. I don't know why you even do them anymore, especially for an offensive lineman. I mean, you really just care about that 10-yard split, if anything. Even the best case scenario, you're a pulling guard, and you're getting vertical. You're having to stop because you're running someone over pretty quickly. And if you're running more than that, it's because you're celebrating a touchdown. So some of the initial thought process, your starts, your first step, the ability to translate the fascial tensions from the foot to the hip and back again, things like that I would do with my sprinters. Yes, some of those building blocks you still are going to do because that's applicable to almost any plyometric explosive athlete. But some of that full out sprint thought process, eventually you just don't need to do that anymore.
So Cornelius Squalls wants to know, is this an injury that will show up on an MRI?
Yeah, you'd end up seeing an extra inflammation in different densities because at the end of the day, MRI is really just measuring different tissue densities. That's why you're going to do it for something like a tear versus like an X-ray. You're really going to only use like, for bone fractures and things of that nature. So it would be a little ambiguous for the most part. It'd probably just be this diffuse image, like inflammation look. It's not like you'd be able to more or less say like, oh, right there on the left side is where it is. It's going to be kind of, like I said, a little ambiguous, but it would help you a bit.
Creighton Wilfong, Dr. West, could this happen, I guess, while you're weightlifting?
Depends on what you're doing. If you were doing like some pretty heavily loaded
Deadlifts or something?
Lunges that you were also lifting. Like I said, the gastroc does cross the knee, but it's not a primary knee flexor. I mean, that's still going to be more the hamstring more than anything. Deadlifting, same thing, hamstring. Usually with the calf, it's going to be something more explosive, more plyometric.
Well, you know what, man? Before you get out of here, I do want to ask you, because I think we all kind of joined a little kerfuffle of sorts this morning, because everybody was talking about who would be the replacement. And we're going to have Alex Shapiro on here Wednesday to give us a little kind of definite detail to that. But, a lot of people were saying, hey, man, we need Tyree Carter was really good. I mean, he has been great, he's a real revelation during this camp, one of the real revelations during this camp. And my argument to that was I didn't like it. I would not mind seeing Tyree Carter there. My reasons for it was simply we've waited a while. We've taken our time. We've broken Alex Leatherwood down to the studs and rebuilt him in technique and his confidence, because they did a number of them over there in Vegas. And I thought that, since he's been taking the second team reps as it is, or the first team reps, why would you mess with that? I think the coaches would I think it would send a bad message to him and his confidence by not showing him the confidence to let him be the replacement. But everybody's got their own thoughts and ideas about that. What say you, Doc?
I'm not gonna lie, I was team Tyree Carter. I think the consistency he's shown, and not just to play right guard, but he was getting snaps at center right during the offseason. He played left tackle when he was in college, so he should be able to flip sides, and that muscle memory should be okay. I think it's more about what he's able to do and the consistency he's had, more so than what an issue with Leatherwood. I think he's fine where he's at. I'm not convinced he makes this team, to be completely honest. I could absolutely see, if you told me all of a sudden that he doesn't make the final 53, I wouldn't be like, oh my God, that's insane. But at the same time, if you told me he made the 53, I'd be like, okay, that makes sense. To me, he's just right on the edge. I just haven't seen enough consistency out of Leatherwood. Yes, he's been the number 2 left guard, but it's almost like in Madden where you have your guard who ranks at like an 80. And if you move him over to left guard, he drops down to a 75. But if your second string left guard's a 72, is that not still better? I mean, it's not a perfect example, but to me, I still think that ultimately what you would get out of a Carter is more. And I think the Bears have shown you that. The Bears have shown you that with the reps he's gotten and how they've talked about him and everything of that nature. Now, apparently that's all going out the window. That doesn't matter, because it sounds like Lucas Patrick's going to be your starting center from what we're hearing whispers out of camp and everything. Today was closed, and the media were not supposed to really be able to say anything, but enough media members tweeted and deleted that they saw Lucas Patrick at center and Whitehair at guard. Now, if I go back and check my notes to last year, I'm pretty sure that Lucas Patrick had all of 5 snaps at center before he broke his foot. Right. So the sample size is tiny. He looked good in the 5 snaps. I don't know if that matters or not. So
it made all kinds of sense, though.
Small sample size.
We were busy arguing about who's going to be the replacement, and it was sitting right in front of our faces. Just kick this guy over.
Yeah.
And so it just makes all kinds of sense.
It was the plan last year, right? I mean, their plan last year, and they felt good about it, was Patrick at center, Whitehair at left guard, Teven at right guard. So why would you not go back to that if you trust that Patrick is healthy? Because he even was out for the last week or two with his own injuries. And so my biggest question, I guess, would be, okay, knowing that Patrick has not been healthy, let's say Patrick does get hurt in the next 2 weeks, first week or two. What are you doing then? Is Whitehair sliding back to center all of a sudden? You're slamming someone in the left guard. It's just musical chairs that you don't love, but it is what it is.
it disrupts more than one position to me. And you got white hair in the middle of it all, just bouncing back and forth between positions, which I think he's more than capable of doing. But what message does it send to the other guys in the locker room, the depth in Jatari Carter and Alex Leatherwood? I agree with Nomad. Like, those guys have to feel somewhat disappointed in not being given the opportunity to at least compete for those positions.
Yeah, but hey, Doc, man, I'm always appreciative of you coming on here, man. You like family on this show, man, because I do love your perspective, man. And I think the people in the chat and all the viewers of the show, they really respect you and they appreciate you as much as we do, man. So again, man, salute to you for jumping on with us and giving us that breaking news and that breakdown for his timetable, which sounds like it's fair to be 6 weeks. So you guys know that. And so I say thank you again, Doc, man. And I can't wait the next time I will be in contact with you ASAP, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. I love popping on here. It's always a good time. If anyone ever has their own physical issues, come visit me down at Ignite Physical Therapy in the West Loop. I got y'all.
You hear that? Down in the
Still
West
coming,
Loop.
Doc.
Check them out.
All right.
Appreciate you, Doc.
Appreciate you, Doc. Salute to you.